Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.
Think People is made possible in part by support from the Community Foundation of the Gunnison Valley. To learn how you can make a difference, visit cfgv.org. The Community Foundation, we're here for good.
Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. Join us today. This week we'll continue with part 2 of my conversation with journalist and author Jonathan Thompson. He's the author of a book called River of Lost Souls: The Science, Politics, and Greed Behind the Gold King Mine Disaster. All right. Well, as I said, let's step away from that for a moment. I mean, that's the book that you've written, and I'm amazed by the book for its literary quality too. So I congratulate you on that. But you're more than just a single issue writer, or even a single region writer in the West. You were editor-in-chief at the High Country News for a number of years, and that is a really broad lens. You looked at the entire Mountain West of the United States. What makes the Western United States such a special and powerful place? Because anywhere you go in the world, it holds this sort of iconic place in people's minds and hearts. The picture of Monument Valley, the John Wayne legacy of, the American Western and so forth. It's something that everyone knows. What's the secret sauce there in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly the landscape and the diversity of the landscape in a relatively small area. I don't think there's anywhere else in the world where you have the canyons of Utah and Zion and Monument Valley, and within an hour or two you can be up on a mountain peak, skiing or something like that. So there's that kind of diversity of it. There's the public lands, the fact that so much of it is public and open to people, and that people can go explore it. And certainly, I think there's the combination of this cultures that have been here for thousands of years, melded with this other culture that came here relatively recently, like a few seconds ago or whatever in human time, and that you've got that collision, but then also that there's always newcomers coming to the West. There's always just like there's always newcomers coming to America. The West, I think, is like the America of America, if you will. Like you've always got people migrating into the West and trying to make it their own. And
Why? It's a tough place to live.
It is. It's a really tough place to live. I think it's because it's a land of possibility. From the outside, people see it as this land of possibility that's not yet fully established. In their minds, whether that's true or not. I think that's kind of the myth of the West, and that's why I think a lot of people come and they are disappointed. They find that it's not as sort of primitive or wild or unformed as they had hoped it would be.
Well, we have planning commissions here too.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of regulate what you can do on your land and so forth.
Yeah, and we have but I also think people come for another reason, which is to reinvent themselves. They feel like there's, I think, whether that's a myth or whether that's true, there's just more space here in the West to kind of move and become a different person.
Well, it's a psychological thing. I remember I grew up in the West, in Texas, and the open plains, the high plains. And the first time I went back east, and these tiny little narrow winding streets, I felt claustrophobic from day one. And I think the opposite is true when you come west. There's this sort of an expansiveness that happens. But let's go back to that first wave of settlers that came across the divide and started fanning out across the West, and as you rightly point out, collided with cultures that have been here for a long time. These weren't just your ordinary people, right? This was a breed of person that, I don't know, took joy in the hardship somehow. Would you agree with that?
I think some of them did, yeah. Certainly a lot of people came and left after, after a year or two, they realized how horrible it would be and they left. Or, I'm sure some people stayed who didn't want to stay, but they had to. They had no choice. But yeah, I definitely think that, if you think about what it must have been like back then to go west, especially from the East Coast at the time, you were going into a completely different land, a completely foreign place, and a place that's, is probably hostile, but you're doing it anyway. You're doing it like, just like people now to kind of maybe reinvent yourself or to find some opportunity or whatever. And you have to be a kind of different type of person, certainly adventurous. And probably if you're not tough, you're going to be tough after dealing with the winters or whatever in Gunnison or Silverton.
Or 8 inches of rainfall a year and so forth.
Yeah, or the desert. Trying to bring cattle out here. It was kind of insanity.
Yeah, well, so I'm going to run the risk of putting words in your mouth right now.
Okay.
Be hijacking some of your words. Because when I saw the title of your book, River of Lost Souls, knowing that it applied to the Animas River and what happened at the Gold King, I couldn't help but feel my perspective expand to, what really has become of the entire Colorado River Basin, this western landscape that we've been talking about. That there's something almost predictive in that title about the whole West. We're facing aridification on a scale that hasn't happened for centuries, right? We're facing, as you have pointed out, immigration, population pressures in places that really weren't meant to hold that many people. All kinds of things, really fascinating and sometimes almost terrifying things happening in the West. Do you think that's an accurate way to characterize the entire distance from here to the Pacific Ocean?
I think it probably is. I personally, I have this sort of mental kind of line that maybe is at the Sierras or something like that where it's like, okay, that's California, that's something different. The coastal,
right?
They've got different issues, and also the Pacific Northwest certainly is. They don't face the same aridity problems that we do. So there's some limits to that, but it's still kind of culturally in the way we treat the landscape and that sort of thing. I think that does hold true all the way to the coast. And so, I think that my book, focuses on the Animas River watershed, but I do think that can be seen as a microcosm for the entire West. It certainly can be easily blown up to just like the Colorado River, because the Animas River it runs into the Colorado. It's part of the Colorado River watershed, but also just it's the same issues. It's mining, oil and gas development, population pressures, as you say, drought, floods. Just kind of the challenges of living in a kind of difficult place, and of trying for years and years to kind of tame that wild area or to build dams all up and down the Colorado River in thoughts that that's going to save us from drought, and it turns out it doesn't. The river will win, or the lack of river will win in the end.
Yeah, and what strikes me is that now what was this remote landscape populated by sort of escapist sort of pioneers, rugged individualists, whether that's a myth or not, who knows. But now what has become of the Colorado River Basin, and really that portion of the West that is fed by it, has become a national issue. People on the East Coast can no longer afford to ignore what's become of water management, for instance, on the Colorado, because so much of their produce comes from from farms that are fed by the Colorado.
Exactly, yeah.
What do you think that does to politics, to culture in the West, to suddenly become not that isolated place we came to, but really something that the entire nation depends upon?
Yeah. Well, I guess, one thing is I feel like that's not new. I feel like certainly during that first wave of mining and that sort of thing, that was driven by East Coast money. The mines most of the mines that were big and that are sort of legendary around Silverton or Telluride or wherever were financed by capitalists from the East Coast. In some cases, Hong Kong. The Rothschilds owned a mine up above Telluride, one of the biggest ones. So it's always kind of been like this colony. The West has always been, I think, a colony for the rest of the country, where they sort of pull stuff out and take it back. So they've always relied on the West for that, and certainly that's true with oil and gas now and coal, and for food. And now now it's something bigger with cities like LA or Phoenix or wherever, and it's also recreation. They rely, these places, as the East becomes more and more populated, they rely more and more on the fact that the West has so much public lands that can't become populated. So they rely on this part of the country for that,
which may also
nature and wild.
May also explain immigration.
Right.
Why the population is growing here.
Yeah. So I think in a way that hasn't changed so much, but what has changed is kind of I think the way the rest of the nation sees the West in a way. Like it certainly feels like the West is less of this frontier than it used to be, and that can be seen just like there's a lot more coverage of Western issues in the New York Times or the New Yorker. Or
the Clive and Bundys of the world have made that a lot more visible. The
Clive and Bundys help that, yeah, and and of course the Colorado River, like you say, those issues, and just the fact that people are paying more attention. So you get something like the Bears Ears controversy, which 20 years ago probably would have hardly been noticed nationally.
Yeah,
it would have been a fight that would have played out on the ground and it would have gotten designated and people would have been mad in Utah, but nobody else would have really known about it. But now that was a national, fight and still is. So
right.
So I think that can be good for sure. For
that awareness is growing about what is actually true.
Yeah, it's growing. So it's positive in that sense. The negative is in that that what that means is that the West now, public lands issues, for example, get caught up in the daily news cycle, whereas maybe they wouldn't have, and that tends to simplify things to the point of where it doesn't really help necessarily that it's getting more coverage. So,
well, that is a fabulous segue into the next topic I wanted to discuss, and that's journalism itself. And you've been a writer, journalist for a long time. What is happening to the estate of journalism? Not just in the West, but everywhere.
Yeah, well, it's changing, that's for sure. It seems to be changing for the worse.
Why do you say that?
And the reason I say that is because it seems like there's a tendency among, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, but there's a tendency certainly of news outlets to try to deliver something that's more entertaining than it is informing because they feel like they need to get more eyeballs and more clicks or whatever. So there's this idea of delivering a product that's not as deep and that's more superficial.
And maybe purposely polarizing because that also
delivers something that's more certainly, when you take out the nuance of an issue like Bears Ears National Monument, when you take that nuance out and you just make it into this Cowboys versus Indians thing, then you create this massive polarization around it that could be unnecessary. So, and I don't know, it's hard to tell especially from within the news industry, whether that's actually what the readers want or whether that's just what we think they want, And so there's this kind of weird dynamic playing, out there that I don't know how it's going to resolve itself.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of experimentation with different models and different ways of doing these things, but it's difficult to see how that might play out. One thing I can say is that High Country News is doing well. It's at a time when other newspapers are watching their subscription-based collapse. Ours is increasing.
Without getting the pom-poms out and becoming a cheerleader, why do you think that's true?
Well, I think part of it might be just the fact that more people are paying attention to the West. It might be just that. But I think another reason is because it does offer a refreshing alternative to the kind of daily news that people see everywhere else.
Yeah. Do you think that it's more important than ever for independent journalists to try to find the center of things? Because honestly, that seems to be what has taken such a hit over the last few years, is it's hard to find a balanced, centrist sort of approach to things.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about that, I guess. I do think that maybe the center, that's a good thing, but finding a false center is, I think, a bad thing. And I think that's what a lot of newspapers still do that. They do the both sides. So when you're talking about something like climate change, they feel the need to bring in some kind of climate change denier, somebody who says, no, it's not really climate change, when in fact, that's not the center to have equal say for both sides. That's not really the center.
No, that's actually less than 10%.
Yeah, exactly. And
consensus.
So finding the true center of an issue, I think that's important. And that can be difficult because it doesn't feel balanced necessarily. Because when you think balance, you think equal weights on both sides. And so
well, you need an authority to reference in order to do that.
Right.
And for so long, that authority has been science.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of your research for River of Lost Souls involved diving into the science of mining and pollution and so forth, what that does. Do you think that what has become of public opinion about science is reversible?
I hope so. I mean,
because it's really not it's not healthy at this point. I'll just go ahead and say that out loud. That so much of what scientists are saying is instantly distrusted by people on both sides. Yeah.
I mean, basically people, I think human beings maybe are, I don't know how it happened, but, we feel like probably, has to do with the information age and the internet age, is that there's so much information out there and there's so many facts that I think that there's a tendency to cherry pick what we want to believe. So we can look at the science and we can find, if we don't like that science, like, I don't want to believe that. Like, this new study says alcohol is bad for you. Oh no, I don't like that science. So I'm going to go find another study that says it's good for you. And, pretty much you can do that. Like that exists, with Google and all that stuff. It doesn't take long to find some study, no matter how dubious it is, that's done by people with doctor or whatever in front of their names that so you can kind of refute that, or you can say that's not the science.
Well, that's why I ask, is it reversible?
Yeah, and probably not, because how I don't know how you would how you would create sort of an authoritative voice that. So I don't think it's reversible. I think it is maybe somewhat overcomable if and I think it probably would help if the media, if people in the media became more scientifically literate, so that they could then become kind of these voices of authority and say, okay, so there's these two conflicting studies, sure, but this one, but look at this one. Here's why this one maybe you shouldn't pay as much attention to it as this one. This one holds more weight. Yeah. And this is how we're going to present it.
Of course, you need more than 500 words
right,
to be able to explain something like that.
And you need more than 140 characters in your tweet. Yeah. And that's one of the challenges right there.
Well, no one said that it would be easy or simple or clean to manage the complexities that we face today. Are you working on anything new?
I just finished a manuscript for a novel.
Oh, fun.
So that actually takes place mostly in Bears Ears National Monument, or the original Bears Ears National Monument before it was shrunk. So it's
Is it a thriller?
It's sort of a thriller, kind of mystery, kind of
fun
thing. And I continue to work for High Country News as a contributing editor, doing a lot of editing for them and also some writing. So, yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for your time. I've enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Think Radio Presents is a production of Alan Morris Media. The show's producer is Isa Forrest. Associate producer, Aaron Lewis.
Thanks for listening. Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. To leave a comment on today's show or to suggest a great story for a future episode, visit thinkradiopresents.com. Tune in next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.